I am very happy to have a new guest today for an interview. We have here Dr. Rebecca Block. She is a neurodivergent coach and impact consultant who teaches you how to work with your brain without procrastination, people pleasing, or panic. And I want to ask you one question right off, because we were promising to each other that we talk about the woo-woo stuff today. There is one thing that I find incredibly hard. Like, I had a spiritual awakening and I realized that death is not something for me to be afraid of. It's a doorway. It leads into another life. And while I make the best of this life here, also there is something else waiting for me that is really good. When I walk out into the world with that knowledge that I am immortal and that I am a multidimensional being and that there is nothing to be afraid of in death, then people react very extreme. They tell me I would be in a psychosis, I would be suicidal, I would be having a mental breakdown, I would be dissociated from reality, I would be hysterical. They call me all kinds of names. Why do you think is it that society, especially the society here in the West, has such a big trouble with relaxing around the topic of death?
Oh man, that's a big one and such a good one. And it relates to a lot of conflicts that I experience as someone that both loves research, is super nerdy. I really appreciate the scientific process and social sciences and all of the like digging and learning we can do about the human mind. And that's not the same as the human spirit, right? And sometimes those things can complement each other beautifully, and sometimes it creates a lot of tension. I find it way easier to come out of the closet, so to speak, as someone who is both autistic, ADHD, grapples with anxiety, has sensory processing disorder, right? Like all of the neurodivergent elements of my brain and nervous system were far easier, even with all the stigma that's attached to them, which is still very much there, than to share spiritual beliefs, right? That is still an area that is more likely to get judgment and also to be divorced from those. Like, here's the rational world and here's the spiritual world, and you can have your woo-woo friends and you can talk, but if you bring up any research with them, they're like, what's wrong with you, right? You're not living in the moment. And if you bring up any spiritual thing with the research range people, they're like, what's wrong with you? That's delusional magical thinking, right? So yeah, I see that split happen all over the place. I have all kinds of personal theories as to why death in particular is like so hard in the rational West, but the probably the simplest one is just that we've gone all in on the idea of what is provable, right? And so anything that cannot be proven yet with our current still limited methods of doing research is suspect. And I feel conflicted about that because on the one hand, I do watch people in my own family, clients, friends, random others, in my own thinking too, times where yeah, it's cognitive bias that is pretending to be something else. It is my brain will be like, oh, this thing that I'm just pumping out of fear, and a cognitive distortion, I'm gonna say it's your intuition, right? This is your intuition warning you not to leave the house. And I'm like, is that really my intuition, or is that just a confirmation bias kicking in of the last 10 times I left the house, right? So I think there's genuinely reason to be to get curious, right? Whenever we want to have a simple answer to anything, for me at least, I try to get curious. I try to check, why am I motivated to have that simple answer? But I think it applies in both directions. And a lot of my friends who I dearly love being friends with, but who are inclined, who are solidly agnostic or atheist, and inclined only towards what can be demonstrated through the scientific method, like, oh, but you're also not being curious, right? You're conflating a unproven hypothesis with a bad idea, and that's also a form of cognitive distortion, right? And so, anyways, I just went on a very long, very rabbit hole tangent there, Tanya. But what do you think? Because I just talked about that for a long time. I'm really curious what you think, and whether any of that resonates with you.
Yeah, I think that especially in the Western world, the people are too much about the mind and too little about the heart, which is also a little too much of male energy and a little too little of female energy. So there is an imbalance between yin and yang.
Mm-hmm.
And if we could just balance it out a little more, we would be closer to that moment where we could at least open ourselves for the idea that maybe there is something after death as well, rather than just saying there is absolutely nothing after death and it's just
Right.
blackness and everything ends there.
Right. Right. No, it's one of the reasons that I get, especially I love listening to like the doctors and researchers who look into near death experiences, right? Because they are using research methods, scientific method to understand something that is in that peripheral space, right? That is at the edge of what we can understand and measure and contemplate. And it's really fascinating stuff to
So
me.
my second question, um, is there anything that you can tell me from your own life experiences? It doesn't necessarily have to be around the topic of death or seeing somebody, a loved one, coming back from the dead or something. It can also be anything. It could be like like, for example, you get certain signs from the universe or you see angels or whatever. Is there anything in particular that you can tell me from your life where you say, okay, this was one of the moments where I knew for absolutely sure that this was a kind of experience that I cannot explain with the regular scientific method, but I know there was something there in in the depths of my heart. What would you
Yeah.
say comes to mind?
The, I mean, I've had lots of those little moments, right? But the biggest moment that comes to mind, it's a bit of a story. Is it okay if I tell a bit of a long
Sure.
story? Okay. When I had just finished high school, I went to kind of serve as a short-term summer au pair for a family out in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Um, and while I was there, I, had a certain number of like off hours. I met some other teenagers who were my age and would hang out with them sometimes in the evenings when I was off. And one evening, we were hanging out in one of their garages, playing pool, listening to music. Some of the other people were using substances. It's true. There was weed and alcohol. I wasn't because, frankly, I was still in a like response mode. My dad loved all that stuff, and I was like, I'm gonna be straight edge, right? Like I wasn't really hardcore straight edge, but I was like, I'm not into that stuff. So I was not using any substances because that would have been the first place my mind would have gone to explain what happened. One of the guys was like, I, got hit the head and like left to use the restroom. And shortly after he left, I suddenly had this, I'm just sitting at the edge of the pool table, like, am I going to play another game of pool? And suddenly I had this sensation that the back of my head, the back of my arms, my upper back was all, I don't know the right word. It was like it wasn't, it was like it was, it was translucent or open, right? It was suddenly, the skin barrier was not a thing. I don't know. I mean, I don't know how to put it into words because it was such an unusual sensation. And then, immediately felt this presence, um, and heard this voice saying, "You have to tell my brothers that I'm okay, and that it didn't happen on purpose, and that I'm okay." And I was like, "What the? I barely know these people. What is going on? I am so confused." And I was like, I just shut down. I was like, I cannot. There is no way. I barely know these people. I'm not going to be like, hey, I just accidentally channeled what I assume is your younger dead brother. And I'm supposed to give you a message and you barely know me. Let me do that. Right. So I like shut it all down. I was like, no, shut it all down. Got a splitting headache. And so asked one of the brothers, I was like, can you give me a ride home? I have a horrible headache. So he's giving me a ride home. Clear skies. Give me a ride home. 5 minutes later, we pull up in front of the house that I'm staying at, and out of nowhere, like skies open, gushing rain, like the type of rain that's like you're going to be saturated to the skin if you are in it for 5 seconds. And so he says, "Look, you don't have an umbrella. There's no cover to the doorway. Just wait. This will pass. Like these storms come up suddenly out of nowhere, and then they'll go away out of nowhere. So just wait until it passes." So I'm sitting there and I'm feeling the throbbing in my head and I'm hearing the voice, tell my brother, tell my brother, tell my brother, tell my brother. And I'm like, oh my God. And so I'm looking out the window. I'm like, I cannot believe that I'm gonna do this, but I don't think I'm gonna be able to get out of the car unless I do. So I tell the brother what it is that happened. And I'm not looking at him. I'm looking out the window. And then I hear him start to cry. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm the worst person on the planet. I'm just upset. And so I turned to him and I'm like, I'm so sorry. I know it's, and he was like, no, you don't understand. When I stepped out to use the restroom, I just was begging my brother, please, please send me some kind of sign. He had died 3 months before falling out of a tree. They had wondered whether it was something that he'd done on purpose because he was 13 and that's a very volatile age. And he was like, this just, it helps so much. Thank you so much. And we never talked about it again after that. That was it. It was like there was no big blah blah anything after that. But the second that we had that exchange, it stopped raining, and then I got out of the car and went inside. And that was one of those moments that I was like, I don't have any other way of explaining this. I did not know that person well enough to have any idea that that would have been what he had gone, that he was thinking when he went to the bathroom. He'd been showing no signs of being upset. He had never brought up his brother's death to me. I had known that the brother had died. Someone else had told me, just like, hey, just be aware of. But like they'd never talked about it. They'd never shown any signs of being upset. Nothing. So that was one that really was one of the earliest experiences that sort of persuaded me, like, okay, there's stuff that we just don't, that we can't fully understand or explain scientifically currently.
And did you get any hint as to why you had this headache? Was this because the person who passed was falling onto the head and had a head injury, or why do you think you had this headache?
Oh, that's really interesting because he probably did fall on his head. No, I was assuming the reason I got the headache was because I was trying to lock it all down and be like, no, shut up, I'm not doing this, this is weird, like I don't want to be seen as a weirdo, but like I'm 18, they're 17 and 19, right? Like this is not a thing that you just do as an 18-year-old that's hanging out at a social gathering. So I'd always assumed that was why I got the headache, was that it was because I was trying to lock it out.
And was that like the first event of many that came after that, or was it basically just a one-time thing?
It was a one-time thing in terms of accidental channeling, but it was one event in the middle of many. There were things that happened when I was a small child. There are things that happen as a teenager. There are things that happen as an adult. It's just the one that there is the most clearly no other explanation for that I directly remember. The other one that there was like the most clearly no explanation for, but I don't directly remember. My mom, who did not believe in any of this stuff, but she witnessed when I was a baby, I somehow had gotten out of my crib and crawled to the top of the stairs, and she heard me cooing, and she went running because at the bottom of the stairs was a marble foyer, and she's like, oh my God, if she falls down these 17 steps, she's gonna die. So she was running to try to get to me, and she got to the bottom of the stairs right as I started to fall down the stairs, except instead of falling, she was like, it was like somebody picked you up and just carried you down, and they set you down on your bottom at the bottom of the stairs, and you were just giggling and laughing like, isn't this so much fun? And she was like, I assume it was the ghost that everybody always said was in our house. I don't know. I was very grateful. I just said thank you a whole bunch, and that was the best. So that was another one that was like, she would tell me that story periodically, and probably contributed to be like, okay, there are things that we just don't. I'm always been super nerdy, but yeah, there are obviously some things that we don't know how to explain yet.
Well, the first thing that would come to my mind is if your mother is telling you that other people say there are ghosts in your house, then that there must be at least one person with mediumship abilities live in that house, because why else do so many souls think, okay, this is the place to go? Do you think your mother had any psychic abilities?
I think she would not have said that she had psychic abilities. She would say that she just, was good at picking things up. but she, for instance, like I was in a bad motorcycle accident when I was 20, and she, in a completely different state than she was, in the middle of the night, landed in the hospital, and then once I finally got home, took the pain pills they'd given me, and crashed out until noon the next day. I woke up to a bunch of panicked messages from my mother going, what happened to you, what happened to you, She was in another country at that point, actually on vacation, and had awakened in the middle of the night with her knee in excruciating pain, which was what I had injured. With her knee in excruciating pain, it was like, oh my God, something has happened to my daughter, I don't know if she's okay, and was trying to reach me continuously until I finally woke up and called her. I was like, I'm so sorry, I was in a motorcycle accident, I'm alive, my knee's messed up, my back is messed up, but I'm alive. And she's like, oh, I knew it, right? So she would have things like that happen, where she knew when a family member, like physically, she would experience symptoms when a family member had something happen. And my grandmother, who was very Catholic and not inclined to generally see things, but her mother, my mom's mom, when my mom's dad had a stroke really young at like 50 and was near death and recovering hopefully, and my grandmother always swore it. She's like, Mother Mary came in at some point and she was going to take your grandfather, and I argued with her. I was like, don't you dare. I have 5 children with him and I cannot take care of them by myself, and you are not taking this was my grandmother's personality. She's like, I am arguing with whatever representation of God is in this room right now. You leave him. You do not get to have him. And she was not a like woo-woo person generally, but she was just very matter of fact about it. She's like, this person showed up, she was going to take my husband. I was like, no, you aren't. I'm drawing the line. And then he survived and he recovered after that. So it was an interesting family to grow up in, like a family that was very practical and didn't and was just like, look, there are these practical things and they happen and we don't know why, but we just treat them as like this. We deal with the information we have and we do stuff about it. So I woke up, my knee was hurting. That meant you weren't okay. So I called you, right? I saw Mother Mary walk into the room. That meant she was going to take my husband. I argued with her, right? It was just like a very like no nonsense kind of vibe about the whole thing.
But I think that shows wonderfully that if we are very assertive, then we can actually do something, even if it might not be the exact plan of what was, coming from above. God has a
Right.
plan, yeah.
Right.
But if we are assertive enough, maybe we can, get a little more time or something.
Right, exactly. Adjust the plan a bit. Yeah. I mean, frankly, my grandmother's personality, one of my cousins used to describe that she was the type that could strip the metal off a battleship just by looking at it. Like, if I were a divine being, I wouldn't want to pick a fight with my grandmother. She was that she was that kind of person. I'm like, okay, never mind. We'll leave that alone.
And I mean, you've given me a bunch of examples that were very, very positive. Did you ever have any kind of super negative experience where you say, I think that was a demon coming to possess somebody around me, or is there anything super negative?
I've had some negative experiences, but I never, it was always hard to tell. To me, is it something, supernatural happening, or is it just because our human brains are so capable of so much negativity and destructiveness all on their own that I never felt, strongly one way or the other that I was like, that has a supernatural explanation, or that's just my mind or someone else's mind going off the rails. In a really unproductive way. But yeah, not anything that I could. There was mischievous things, again, to the house being haunted that I grew up in, right? It had been a house that had a long reputation before my parents bought it. It was part of why they were able to get it for a very good price, because all four of the original owner had lived there for a long time, been the one and then had died in his 80s. And then there were four owners after that all something horrible happened to them after they bought the house. So like, first guy landed in prison. The second guy had a heart attack and died really young. The next one went completely bankrupt. And I can't remember. And so by the time my parents came upon the house, it had there were holes in it was this beautiful old home, but there were holes in the ceiling. Stuff was rotting. It was falling apart. And when they were trying to repair it, this is before I was born, they were trying to repair it, stuff kept happening to the people that they had hired to repair it, right? So somebody would be there to paint something and they'd have, set the paint cans at the bottom and then they'd climb up the ladder and then they'd go to climb back down to get, and the paint can would be disappearing, right? Like it wasn't there anymore, or the tools would, so all this kind of stuff. And finally, one moment, my dad was trying to rip out the rotten, it was like a velvet rope banister that went up the stairs, and he was trying to rip it out because it was rotten so it could be replaced. And he felt hands on his shoulders shove him down the stairs, and he thought it was my mother because she was the only other one in the house at the time. He started screaming at her, why would you shove me down the stairs? She came running from the other room where she's like, what are you talking about? I wasn't even anywhere near you. She's like, how did you shove me down the stairs? She's like, I didn't shove you down the stairs. And she was like, that's it, there's obviously a ghost here. I don't believe in ghosts, but now I do. And she did some research about what you're supposed to do about ghosts. She found some sage, she lit it. She's like, I just walked through the whole house being like, we are here trying to repair the house, we are not trying to destroy it. We're please let us fix it up. We respect it, right? And she said after that, it just became friendly or slightly mischievous things. So that was why she figured it was the ghost that had carried me. Things would happen where I'd get home, I'd be the only one that got home from school. I'd take off my shoes by the front door. I'd go and make myself a snack and do other things. And then I realized, oh, that's right, I need to go outside to feed the dogs. And I'd go to put my shoes on and my shoes are not there. Where are my shoes? Search. Can't find them. Okay, I'll go upstairs to my closet to get another pair of shoes to go outside and feed the dogs. And I'd open my closet and my shoes would be right there in the closet. I'd be like, wow, I could really use that tidying ghost in my current house with my children. I would love that kind of ghost to be in my house now. So weird little mischievous things would happen of stuff getting moved, and you're like, none of us moved that. How did that happen? But not anything really bad. Now, much later, the next owner of the house said that she knew about the ghost stuff, and she said that she'd had a psychic come in, and the psychic said there's really bad energy in this one closet in the front part of the house, and did some kind of thing, whatever. There was really negative, some kind of bad spirit vibes, demon, I don't know. And I was like, that's so fascinating, because suddenly I was like, wait a second, we never used that coat closet. It was a coat closet. We never used it. We never, I don't remember. I lived in that house for 18 years. I don't remember any of us opening that door even one time. Even though it was the one closest to the front door, we would all go further away to hang our coats up in a slot where my parents had set up a bunch of hooks at the top of the basement, and never used the actual coat closet. And I was like, we never talked about it. I was like, that's so strange. But so anyways, there's more little quirky things like that that I'm rambling on too long about, Tanya. Sorry. You can't be
No,
going about
not
this.
at all.
Blah, 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 blah.
Not at all, because I'm seeing the pattern, you know. Oftentimes in a very old house, there are several ghosts, and each of them has different things about them. Some can be good, some can be bad, you know, from their intentions. Some are just here to protect the house. Others are there to do something, you know, to pull the energy out of the people who live in the house. So it's very, very different. And
Yeah.
with an old house, you always have to find out what is here and what does it want, what's the intention behind it and everything.
Right.
But just to complete this, I also had something like this once. I had a black orb in my apartment, and I do not really know if that black orb was a kind of entity or if it was just a bunch of negative energy that had accumulated to this form of a ball. I don't know. But what I saw was, I was alone in my apartment back then, and I saw it coming from the top right side of me, from the ceiling. And as soon as I looked at it and saw it, it became incredibly fast, you know, like a bullet. It was shooting down past my face into the next room, and then it threw something down that was standing there. And that was a bunch of cartonages, like packages, you know, but they were still in compressed form, so quite big and heavy, and it just crashed down. So you really need force to crash it down because it's heavy, you know. So when that thing came across me and then went into the other room to crash something down, immediately my personality kicked in, like the one from your granny, saying, "Get the F out of my house. This is my house. You're not welcome here. What do you even think to come through here? You have no permission," you know. So I immediately got very, you know, I put out the inner sergeant, the drill sergeant from the boot camp, you know. So, but to this day, I do not know. Was it just a bunch of negative energy? Where did it come from? Did somebody else send it to me? Like, you know, when they do voodoo or magic rituals to send negative energies your way? Or was it something that just accumulated from all of the negative things that happen in my life and the according emotions, you know?
Yeah.
So I didn't know where it's from, but it's definitely something I could visibly see. Yeah. But there were different kinds of experiences in that field. But I want to make you talk again, which is why I will ask you another question. There is also this theory, many call it a conspiracy theory, but there is a theory that there is this MK Ultra program, and that they try to basically produce people who have psychic abilities because they want to use them for the military industrial complex for their own advantage, so that they have someone who can actually do remote viewing for them, who can check out certain scenes to find out, is there a bomb or is there nothing, and stuff like that. And when we read the EP Stein files, then we can see, okay, they targeted individuals who had autism, because they obviously found that when you take an individual with autism or with neurodivergence in general, and you put them under certain forms of hypnosis and torture and other things, then they will develop these psychic abilities, and then they're basically useful to the program. So with that background, do you know anyone, or do you have any experiences yourself where you say these are things that kind of point in that direction, that something like this can happen? Or do you say, no, there is actually nothing I know about that?
There's nothing that I know about that. The closest thing that I know about that was from another podcast that I was listening to. I think Maya Violik's Breakdown, where she was interviewing one of the trainers of those remote viewing programs for, I think, U.S. military purposes. It was a fascinating interview, and I was like, wow, I had never thought about any of that before. I need to be vague here because I don't want this person to get in trouble. I had a extended family member once who had been involved in the military, who joked, I think it was purely a joke with me when I was a teenager, about how, I'm going to use they pronouns to be specifically neutral, but about how, like, they were going to, you know, like, did I want to be recruited because I could, you know, do, this was after I had sent a long distance Reiki treatment to this person, and this person's body was so unused to receiving help that instead they broke out in hives and then called me immediately. Was like, I know this is you. What did you do? I was like, you're under stress, and I was sending you some like Reiki healing energy. I will make sure not to do that without explicit permission again. Sorry, I just was making it available for your body to tap into if it needed it. So definitely a good life lesson learned. And so that person was joking, like, I'm gonna recruit you so you can send hives to all of our, enemies in foreign countries, blah blah blah. And I was like, no, I'm not available for that. The military tried to recruit me when I was 18 because I was a National Merit Scholar, and I was like, hey, sorry, I'm a pacifist. You don't want me. And they spent like 30 minutes on the phone with me trying to convince me that I wasn't a pacifist. And I was like, I definitively am. Please leave me alone. I am not. I'm not interested. But it wasn't in any way connected, as far as I knew. The only reason they were contacting me was because I was a National Merit Scholar, not because of being autistic and having weird experiences. So yeah, that's the closest I've got. I have heard that talked about from other people. I was one of the people that was in like a gifted and talented program, but there wasn't anything weird that was happening in the gifted and talented program that I was in as a kid. There weren't any of the like weird stories that other people have and have shared about things that happen in those programs.
Yeah, but that definitely sounds like someone who had more knowledge but didn't really reveal much. Yeah, but definitely sounds very probable. So just to complete it from my side, there were a lot of stories where I could tell that they are not just normal coincidences. It's just weird stories where you can't really know why did this happen. There are too many questions open around it, Like, for example, when I was about 3, we were in a pyramid. It was a glass pyramid. A very huge one. And inside this pyramid, there was a hotel and also a public bathing site. So there were pools, and these pools were all made as if you were on a tropical island. So you could swim through certain alleyways, and then there were palm trees and everything. So, because of course, as it is a glass pyramid, there is all the sunlight coming through. Mm-hmm. So, sorry, I have to click this away. So basically we were in one of those pool sites, and my parents were gone having a coffee with someone, and a befriended family was there, and I didn't wear any floaties. I was like 3 years of age, and I stood there next to the pool, and somebody violently shoved me in, like with a lot of pushing power, so that I basically didn't just drop in there. I flew like a meter, and then I dropped into the water, so that I really couldn't reach the side of the pool anymore. And so I was basically drowning. I was going underwater. And I remember, I was completely cool at that time with it, because when you're 3 years old, you don't really know what life or death is. So you're basically like, okay, then this happens. No problem at all. So I was like in there, and I realized, okay, I can't get back up there. But then somebody jumped in, a friend of our family, she jumped in and she pulled me out and saved me from the water. But there are many questions around it, Why did I have no floaties on but stood next to a pool? If I was a mother, I wouldn't just leave my child alone with some strangers next to a pool without floaties. Why does someone, if he sees a little child 3 years old, 4 years old, next to the pool, why do you come to the idea to throw that child into the pool? Nobody in their right mind would do this. And then also, why was it in a glass pyramid? It's just, it's just too many weird things. And then when you have several of these very weird occurrences throughout your life, then at some point you sit there thinking, what the heck is actually going on in my family? So you start being very suspicious about the people you grew up with, But definitely that's going into that direction.
Yeah,
so
that's really interesting.
We have like 8 minutes left. So is there anything that you really are wanting to say, something that's on your heart, where you say that's really something I would like to tell? Could be a story, could be an experience, could be something totally else. What would you like to talk about?
I think the main thing that I just wanted to surface is how many times recently, I would say within the last like 6 months, I have come across other especially late identified neurodivergent adults who are saying, I have had so much experience and I get so much respect for being very logical, right? Being able to spot patterns, being very logical, and I keep my spiritual life very secret, right? And now I'm wanting to figure out, like, how can I integrate these things a little bit more? Is it safe to, or what? And I've seen this conversation come up in several like totally unrelated spaces with completely different online community spaces that I'm in. And what's fascinating to me was that I had not realized that there might be a pattern there until I went, oh, this is a thing I've wanted all the time, but I assumed that I was just extra weird, right? That not only am I quirky in the way that my brain is wired, but also that I both highly value logic and research and see that there is something else that we can't explain, and to start to see like, no, I'm not alone there. There's a lot of us that are wondering the same thing, and just being a little concerned about how to bring that up. How do I do that and not feel once again that it's another form of masking, that it's like, well, when I'm with this group that's logical, they're okay with me being neurodivergent, but I better not admit that I'm, spiritual too. And when I'm with this group that's spiritual, they're more likely to completely dismiss if I share anything about psychological research about how neurodivergence shows up in society or inside someone's mind. Or they're like, oh, what, ugh, right? And that had been my only experience before, was that those were the two groups that existed. And now that I've been seeing this exact question of like, well, how do you do this? How do you bring this together if you're someone that really does value science and logic and reason, and also values spirit and awareness and presence? Am I the only one? And I'm like, oh my gosh, I wasn't even willing to ask the question initially whether I was the only one. That's how scared or convinced, even not even scared, just like convinced that I was the only one, that I didn't even ask the question. I started seeing other people asking the question. So that to me is really fascinating. And I think especially as an executive function coach, right, when I work with people whose brains are wired differently, they're trying to figure out how to like get stuff done in a way that fits their brain. I think people make the assumption, I use a lot of research, people make the assumption like, well, she's going to be a logic only person, right? And she's going to be all pro productivity and get a lot of stuff done. And it can be disorienting, I think, sometimes for people to realize that a good portion of the time, that's not, I'll be like, is that actually something that needs to get done? Is that actually like, yes, here's what the research shows, but also here's a completely different perspective. Is it possible the universe is giving you a gift, right? Some of those kinds of questions. And anyways, I'm not even sure exactly what I'm trying to say, other than that if someone is listening to this who has also been thinking you are especially weird for valuing both, you're not. I think that's because I wish somebody had said that to me earlier. And so, yeah, that was the other thing that I really wanted to
I absolutely understand what you say, because I think sometimes science and spirituality, they point to exactly the same thing, but with a very different language. And you and me, we are both people who understand both languages. So I can read a PubMed study and understand what's going on neurologically in somebody's brain, but I can also tap into my gut feeling and into my intuition and do a tarot reading. I can do both. Yeah. Right. So both sides are very critical about you. If you say that you can actually handle both sides, yeah, and that you're comfortable with that, then they go like, no, you have to decide for one side, only one side.
Right. Yeah. And I'm like, why? I would.
Exactly.
It's kind of like the way that they thought that autism and ADHD couldn't coexist, right? They're like, no, you're either autistic or ADHD. And then finally, the research evidence are like, oh, these things are not mutually exclusive. It shows up differently when it's both of them present as a neurotype, right? It's a distinct combination of features, right? But yeah, for a long time, it's just like, well, it's one or the other.
Yes.
Either you're ADHD or you're autistic. You can't be both. And nope. Also a contradiction that, yes, there's parts that contradict, but it still is true. It's a paradox rather than actually mutually exclusive, right? And it's, I think, the same thing with spirituality and science.
Well, as we only have so little time left, I would like to complete the interview now. I thank you so much for being here and for being so open and trusting me with this topic, because we are going public with this, not live, but public. And it's really nice of you that you open up. And I mean, you risk a little bit of your reputation when you are a doctor, but you do this because it's for the betterment of the world. And I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Thanks, Tanya. I really appreciate that. I always welcome a conversation with anyone where it's an authentic conversation and we're not performing something. So
exactly. Thank you.